I'm joined now by Congressman Jim Himes. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
So right off the bat, I do want to talk about some new reporting. It's international reporting from Der Spiegel that shows that, in fact, the private information, emails, usernames, passwords of some of Trump's top cabinet officials are indeed available online. And of course, those are the exact pieces of information that will allow folks to gain access into unsecured apps, like, for example, Signal. And so can I have your reaction right off the bat to this new reporting that kind of really puts on full display why these folks shouldn't be using unsecured apps to do war planning?
Yeah, no, I mean, you premise the question exactly right, and while I have zero sympathy for the arguments that it's okay to put war planning on Signal, that's wrong for so many reasons. Just ask Jeffrey Goldberg. What this illustrates is that the online world of 6 months ago is not the online world of today. So the answer, of course, is, as they've done for a long time with the President of the United States, is when you have a position of immense sensitivity, you get off your personal phone, right? Because there's just so many vulnerabilities there.
And so, what would normally happen in an instance where, let's say, a lower ranking official, where some regular member of the military did what these Trump administration officials did with regard to this Signal chat?
Yeah, I tried to make this point in my opening today when we had the director of national intelligence and the director of CIA and the other leaders of the IC. Americans need to remember, because they're trying to litigate this by saying, oh, well, the information wasn't that classified or didn't need to be classified or was declassified.
Right.
Look, any service member that reports to Pete Hegseth, any service member who had done this would have been court-martialed, cashiered, dropped in ranks, probably kicked out of the service, right? And that's what's driving me crazy right now. This was an egregious mistake. It could have resulted in the loss of life of our pilots, of our sailors in the region. But mistakes do happen. And when mistakes happen, the critical thing is that people take responsibility for those mistakes, that they say, we're going to learn how this happened, we're going to fix it, and we're going to visit accountability on people who allowed it to happen. None of those things have happened here, right?
Right.
Pete Hegseth is still, and Mike Waltz is still calling Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic a loser and saying somehow it's his fault. So, I mean, I got to tell you, quite apart from the underlying action, which might have resulted in dead pilots, the way that Pete Hegseth and so many people involved in this thing have responded should give us zero confidence that they're going to learn from this mistake.
Well, to that point, even today, most recently, Trump was asked about this, and he started blaming Signal and suggesting that Signal itself is defective for apparently allowing for the crime of Jeffrey Goldberg accessing a chat that he was invited to, like, for that taking place. And so does it give you any pause that in a moment where what this administration should be doing is just recognizing its mistake and then moving forward in a way that shows that they're willing to correct it, the fact that they're not, and instead keep casting the blame onto Signal, onto Jeffrey Goldberg, onto the deep state, onto Democrats? I mean, we're probably a day away from them going back and claiming that Hillary Clinton, Hugo Chavez, or Chinese bamboo fibers are to blame for all of this. Does the fact that they will not accept responsibility give you pause in terms of their ability or willingness to actually fix some of these problems that landed us here in the first place?
Yeah, look, a couple of things. Number one, we all know who Donald Trump is, and his way of operating sets the tone here. Now, we've all been watching Donald Trump for at least 8 years now, and Donald Trump's strategy when faced with a scandal or a problem or a mistake is to attack, to sue, and that's pathological, right? Human beings
Right.
don't act that way. We teach our 5-year-olds that when you make a mistake, you say sorry and you learn from it. But that's not Donald Trump. And what does worry me a little bit, look, I don't think that these guys are going to start chatting about attacks next month on Signal because they don't like the bad publicity. But values start at the top. And no, of course, Donald Trump's going to impose no accountability. And, that really raises an issue for the, million plus uniformed service members who are now watching their boss, the Secretary of Defense Hegseth, do everything except responsibility. Not one of them would survive this. And I care a lot about systems, and a system that says that accountability is only for the sergeant or the lieutenant or the captain, but not for the general or the secretary of defense is a system that's not going to work in the long run.
Can you talk about the implications here in terms of what our enemies are able to glean from all of this?
Well, as I said,
Probably not great, huh? Like,
but for the grace of God, I mean, again, technically speaking, the Russians and the Chinese, had they been on their game, and they're usually on their game, they could have gotten this stuff and they could have passed it to the Houthis. And even though it was only 2 hours, I guess, it could have resulted in real problems, fatal problems, lethal problems for our service people. But look, I mean, let's zoom out a little bit here, right? When the United States votes with Russia and North Korea, and not with the UK and Germany when it comes time to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when we completely shut down our soft power, USAID, right? When we completely shut down our soft power, when some guy named Big Balls fires the people who look after our nuclear weapons. I mean, I could keep saying these things for the next 20 minutes, but the answer to your question is that the folks in the Kremlin, the folks in Beijing, the folks in North Korea and Iran cannot believe the good fortune that they now have.
Congressman, can you bring us a little bit behind the curtain? Because there is a very cynical view of this, which is that none of your Republican colleagues ever cared over the last decade when they were wailing about the national security implications of what Hillary Clinton did. That they never cared about that. It was only for political attacks, and their silence gives credence to that theory. Are there people on the right who seem to care at all, or is it true that over the last decade, any time that we heard about national security, it was really just to brandish their own credentials, and it wasn't actually about the content of what they were saying, the substance of what they were attacking?
Yeah, in the closed hearing today, because the open hearing got pretty hot, right? In the closed hearing, I sort of tried to take the temperature down a little bit by reminding my colleagues on the Republican side what would have happened if this scandal had emerged under Biden or under Obama.
Right.
And I think they got it, right? Remember Benghazi, right? Long time ago, but Benghazi spurred no fewer than 9 investigations, right?
Yeah.
And so these guys know that if this had happened under Biden, there would have been impeachments underway. The Capitol would probably be in flames right now. Jim Jordan would be swinging from the chandeliers. I mean, they
Yeah.
know that. And to be fair to them, look, a number of them, look, you and I both know that right now, with the president's numbers as high as they are, declining though they might be, Senate and House Republicans are a wholly owned subsidiary of Donald J.
Right.
Trump Inc. But look, you've got a few profiles and courage there. Don Bacon is saying, come on, guys, this is crazy. This is terrible. And I'm sure that Susan Collins is, as concerned as
Yeah.
ever, and considering drafting a sternly worded letter. But
Right.
this president has a galactic draw on pretty much every member of the House and the Senate on the Republican side.
Right. This isn't exactly soldiers storming the beaches of Normandy levels of courage that we're seeing right now out of the Republican conference. Congressman, what do you expect will happen in the immediate aftermath of all of this? I mean, you had just alluded to the fact that in the past, as the result of, in the immediate aftermath of Benghazi, we saw no fewer than 9 investigations. What's going to happen as the result of this?
Yeah. And by the way, let me go back to your previous point here, because it's not even about soldiers, storming the beaches of Normandy. It's not that long ago that John McCain, in a presidential debate when he was running against Barack Obama, and a woman said Barack Obama is a Muslim, in a presidential campaign debate, John McCain said, no, ma'am, I don't agree with Barack Obama on anything, but he's a decent civil human being. I mean, that sounds like it was 200 years ago, but it was just, whatever it was, 12 years ago. Anyway, to your question, where do we go from here? For us to let this go, it's totally up to them. For us to let this go, there needs to be an honest proffering of the facts of what happened, not by Jeffrey Goldberg, but by the people actually involved. I know that's a crazy thought, but you know what? The ranking member of the Intelligence Committee probably ought to not get his information from Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlantic. So there needs to be an honest proffering of the facts. There needs to be an investigation that says, and it needs to be a fair investigation that says, here's how this all went wrong. Here's what we're learning. And then there needs to be some accountability, whatever that looks like. But we are so far from that right now when Mike Waltz is calling Jeffrey Goldberg a loser and Pete Hegseth is climbing off a plane and blaming, whatever it is. I mean, anyway, this is not hard as a political matter. I don't like to think politically about national security matters, but folks, Republicans, Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, you want this to go away? Just own it, learn from it, and let's move on.
And the irony of that, Congressman, is that is probably the last thing that any of these Trump administration officials would do, because their whole ethos, their whole worldview is to never accept defeat, never accept blame, never shoulder any accountability or responsibility for anything they've done, and instead to barrel forward as if they've been right all along. And really, that's going to be on their own undoing, because what could have been a shorter, albeit uncomfortable news cycle is now being prolonged by virtue of the fact that they would rather cook up more conspiracy theories and cast blame everywhere they can instead of just acknowledging objective reality. And look, this isn't a difficult story for people to wrap their heads around. This isn't similar to like Trump's first impeachment, where we have to figure out an extortion plot against the Ukrainian president, where he withheld funding for weapons in exchange for dirt on Joe Biden. Everybody understands what it means to accidentally include somebody, include a journalist in an unsecured group chat while you're doing war planning. It's pretty obvious for everybody who's watching right now to see what's happening. So,
yep. No, that's right. And look, think about it this way: take it out of the partisan realm. All of us make mistakes. I make mistakes, and it's hard to recognize a mistake and to say you're sorry. But here's the thing. You know how we get better? We get better by learning from our mistakes. Right. And Donald Trump's religious view that you always deny, and never apologize. Look, that may be satisfying in the moment. USA, USA, USA. That may be satisfying in the moment. But the problem with that is that you never learn. And this is a scary, complicated world. And man, if your whole ethos is about never learning, it's not going to work.
Correct. We'll leave it there. Congressman, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.